All right, good afternoon and welcome. I want to thank each of you for being here, making the effort to come out and be part of this informational event. My name is Robert MacDougall. I'm currently the chairman of the Front Royal Warren County Economic Development Authority, which is the host for this event. As you probably know, one of the core missions of the Economic Development Authority, not just here but anywhere, is to expand the commercial tax base of a locality for the purpose of alleviating some of the residential tax burden that falls on our residents. So in that light, the topic of data centers I know has come up at various times in our town and counties over the past several years, and is likely to probably come up again at some point. And in thinking about how can we as a community just become a little more informed on this vibrant sector in the state of Virginia, thought it'd be nice to have an informational event, invite a subject matter expert in to talk about the trends in data center development in Virginia, good, bad, and different, and to be able to learn a little bit more about this sector outside of the next prospect or proposal or thing that is coming before any of our various bodies. The target audience for today, and the invitation that I sent out, was to our town council, our town planning commission, town planning staff, county board of supervisors, the county planning commission, and the county planning staff. And I asked them also to share to others that are interested in, that would be interested in a topic of this nature. And it is a public event, so everyone is obviously welcome, but that is who we were sort of orienting the discussion towards. At this point, I'd like to introduce I've got the pleasure to introduce our guests. Appreciate them coming out and putting the effort in here to do what will essentially be about a 20-minute presentation and then about 30 minutes of Q&A. So we can certainly end earlier if we need to, but that's what we've allotted for today's event. Kimley-Horn, the firm that's here today to present, is a national planning and engineering consulting firm. And as I mentioned, they've agreed to present our community leaders with the latest trends, benefits, and challenges facing data center development in Virginia. Specifically, and I'll let them briefly introduce themselves as well, are John Carnes, Jamie Cox, both civil engineers that have consulted and helped different entities and localities plan in the data center sector, amongst many others, industrial, warehousing, what have you, and Kimberly Kennedy. Let's see. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to you guys, and thank you for being here.
Yeah. Hi everybody, I'm John. I'm a civil engineer. I've been working in Virginia since 2006 and done all sorts of projects. I've done a decent amount of data centers, although it's not been sort of the main focus of my career. But here we put together a presentation. We tried to give a high level of what these things are, what they look like today. We're going to try and go through the presentation pretty quickly because we want to make as much time as possible for y'all's question. We want to hear the tough questions, the curious questions. We're here to dig in and provide as much expertise as we can. We're engineers and we design the site itself. So what a civil engineer does in this kind of situation is basically go from the building to the property line, maybe the connecting infrastructure. That's what we design. We're not data center owners or investors or anything like that. So we can speak a lot to the technical nature and to the planning side, how these things are accommodated. There may be some questions you ask that we may not be ready to answer, but we can make a commitment to follow up with you all after the presentation.
Jamie Cox, civil engineer. Similar to John, I've been working on data centers for the last 3 to 5 years. Before that, did a lot of industrial, mixed use, commercial and residential work. As John said, we handle the technical aspect of the data centers. We do everything from reviewing zoning code to designing the utilities and putting the profiles together to make sure that they are working with everything in the system. I'll let Kimberly introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Kim Kennedy. I am in the creative services side of Kimley-Horn, so I can help do renderings and help kind of explain things in more layman terms to the public. I work heavily in public engagement, and making sure I get accurate information out to the public. So essentially taking that engineering speak and making sure everyone can understand it. I'm also a Clark County resident, and I live very rurally, so I understand the unique needs and I guess pressure points of development, and also keeping that rural nature and that rural environment that is in a place like here.
And for those folks in the back, just before we get started, how's our volume level? Are we okay? Great. All right.
The two guys up.
What's that?
The two guys up.
Oh, okay. All right. All right, let it
All
rip.
right, so really Data Center 101. I'm going to start from the bare basics. Not sure if you're familiar with what data centers are, but data centers are basically an area to house servers that hold the amount of data that is processed on a daily basis. So be it the phones that you take pictures on, emails that you send, videos that we record, anything that is uploaded to the internet or is stored somewhere needs a place to stay. And basically these data centers operate as one big system. So they're all connected by fiber, all the way from here in Virginia to the West Coast, all the way to Europe and Asia. Everything is connected by fiber, and the ability to talk to somebody in Australia or FaceTime with somebody in Europe, those are allowed and able to do by data centers being able to process the information as quick as it does. On this slide, yep. So yeah, just a quick definition. So they are rows of servers housed mainly in high secured cages. So as everyone knows, you don't want people stealing your data. So these facilities are very secure. They make sure that people cannot get in and out and freely access everything that you want secure on the server. They also are supposed to be up and running 99.9% of the time. So be it we have a hurricane that happens and emergency services needs to get out to the community. The way they do that is through communication through these data centers. So with that, they require backup power supplies, be it generators, natural gas, any ways that they can to make sure that they are operational to supply everyone that needs access to these facilities. We can go to the next slide. So there's different types of data centers. Really, these are kind of the 5 main types of data centers. Co-location is a big facility that multiple users are using. So be it the tax service down the street, the food store down there, they might all operate out of one data center. They all rent space out of that co-location area and is used out of that same server room. Enterprise is more geared towards larger companies that want to have secure servers. So be it your, I don't know, IBM, banks, things like that. They have their own enterprise data center. So there's not multiple users inside that facility that can access it. Hyperscalers, that's your Google, Amazon, Microsoft. They're the ones that are processing the largest amount of data across the system. They operate on some bigger buildings. They're the ones that run all your streaming services, YouTube, Google, your search engines. They need large centers because they have a massive amount of data that they need to store. Edge data centers, those operate on the edge of major cities. So they're a little bit smaller facilities that make sure that the center part of large cities as well as the surrounding communities are operating on the same speeds. So you want to make sure that someone that's living, for our reference, in DC is getting the same internet speeds as someone out here. Those are what edge data centers do. And then underground, those are super secure facilities, places that can use geothermal heating and different aspects like that to make them operate a little bit more efficiently. We don't do much underground. There's not a lot of those that are built. They're super secure, and those are probably the most expensive because you're building underground. Next slide. So what is driving the growth? We talked about it a little bit already, but everything that you see on the screen are reasons for the increase in demand for data centers. So every day there are millions of pictures taken, millions of emails sent, millions of phone calls made. All that needs places to be stored and processed. Streaming's a big one. So everyone now is trying to cut the cord, right? But then that means that you're using Netflix, Amazon Prime, those different types of services, and that is all processed through data centers. As we talked about, emergency communication. So, for example, down in Florida after the hurricanes, or in North Carolina after the hurricanes came through, emergency communication services use data centers to talk back and forth to each other. So all of the information of who lives in what house, how do I get there, are there alternate routes to get to these places, that is stored in these data centers, and the emergency services use that to process through the system. Apps on your phone every day, so be it your text messages that you send, or I don't know, other things that people want to do.
GPS that we all used to get here.
GPS, yeah, that's it. Trying to get here, right? No one goes on MapQuest anymore and prints out the directions. They want to use their phone. So, so those are items that are constantly evolving and constantly increasing the amount of storage that they need. And because of that, the demand for data centers is growing. Go to the next slide. Team makeup. So as we talked about a little bit, it's usually end user driven. In terms of the demand, and the people that we work with usually are either end user specific or third party developers. So the end user is the person that's going to use the system at the end. So be it your hyperscaler that comes in and says, hey, I need another data center to store some more processing servers.
So it could be like Citibank, right?
Yeah.
Or it could be a group that's hosting, these small businesses all having a little space in the server rack.
Exactly. And then on the private developer side, those are the people that are trying to help keep up with the demand. So from our discussions and the events that we've been to, really the amount of data that's getting added to the system every day, we're probably about 3 to 5 years behind keeping up with the demand that's there. So private developers are coming in and helping increase the capacity and the construction ability to get more buildings built to keep up with the demand. One of the items that we didn't talk about on the previous slide, it was on there, but AI is a big push. So the increase in AI is pushing the market to build faster than it possibly can. But the biggest thing with the private developers are most of the people all the people that we work with have experience with data centers, so they either worked for an end user and know what needs to come out of that system, or they have good relationships with end users that they're working with. Site selection. So this is our main slide. I will say site selection is the biggest key that we try and get people to understand, because ultimately, and the state of Virginia is a great one. 5 years ago, data centers were the Wild West. Everyone could kind of do everyone, and that's where everyone got these bad ideas from. But nowadays, we take extensive time to go through and select the correct site for data centers. Key factors that we look for: power, and water. East Coast, there's a lot more water supply. There's also different abilities to cool data centers. So you can have water cooled, you can have air cooled. There's new technologies coming. Liquid cooling's a thing of the future that we're seeing. But these are things that we look for. So can we tie into the grid easily? Is there a power line within a couple hundred feet, maybe half a mile down the road, that we can tap into and put a substation on our site to run the data center? Water demand. I know water is always a big thing that everyone's worried about, because you see the articles that says, I think there was an article a couple years ago, Google was using a couple million gallons of water a day. The big thing with water, and what I do mostly, is work with municipalities to understand, do they have excess water? If we increase the water demand that we need, what do we need to do to increase that infrastructure? So we have a couple end users that we work with that say, hey, I want to build a data center in your county. We know that water is not going to be over to this side of the county for 5 years. What can we do to help you increase that? Do you guys need us to put a pipeline in 2 to 3 miles down the road that helps develop that and the surrounding community, so you don't have to be off wells, everyone doesn't have to be off septic?
Yeah, we've seen that a lot where folks have realized, just like it would be if you put in a big subdivision, you need to make sure those roads, those schools, those utilities are upgraded to whatever it is we are about to build. No different with data centers. If we're going to be drawing more water, it's up to that end user to take care of that cost out of their own pocket, not the community.
And another item to highlight on the water that it's hard to get people to understand, but they may be drawing 100,000 gallons a day, but they're putting 60 to 75,000 gallons of that back into the system. So after they used it, and back up a step, when they, let's say, just for example, they pull 100,000 gallons a day, they're not pulling 100,000 gallons every day. They're going to cycle that through 3 to 6 times to cool the system and more. And so they are working on efficiencies to try and cycle through water, so they're using it multiple times before then discharging that back into the water treatment system. So maybe I have sites that are doing water treatment on site. So let's say the county doesn't have the capacity to handle 100,000 gallons being dumped into the water treatment system. We can build a water treatment plant on site and then discharge that back into a creek, stream, reservoir, wherever it needs to go, and then it goes through the water life cycle again. Site selection, also proximity to other resources. So as John talked about, infrastructure, roads are another big portion that we look at. The good thing with data centers compared to, let's say, we were building a warehouse, right? You're going to have warehouses bring in hundreds of semi-trucks a day. A data center like this is only going to bring in maybe 10 to 12 trucks a week. That just brings in servers, equipment, things that need to change in and out. So it's not like we're running increasing traffic on the site. The other big thing that we look at, jurisdictional requirements. So as I talked about a little bit earlier, we do extensive zoning research, extensive communications with the local municipalities to try and understand, one, how we meet the requirements, and two, how can we exceed the requirements. So for example, let's say a setback for an industrial site is going to be 50 feet. Well, we have a building on site, maybe some generators that we want to kind of make sure are blocked off. So we'll either do some screening or we'll set back maybe 100 feet, 150 feet to try and protect those views to our adjacent neighbors.
And by screening, that can be a couple of things. So we can do, and we had some photos in the first slide, we can go back to that later on, but what we don't want is this big ugly building along the side of the road.
Correct.
So we might have some evergreen plantings that stay green and block it visually all year long. We might create a berm that just blocks that site. We might have a wall, right, that has like a nice cladding on it, or sometimes combination of all three. So you combine that with meeting or exceeding the setback, meaning the distance from the building to the road, and you mitigate that visual impact that it feels like to the community.
Yep. And the next slide. So project life cycle. So as we talked about a little bit, so development agreements early on, the developers or the end users are working on purchasing the land or trying to do some high-level due diligence to understand the feasibility of the land. So that's where we get brought in, do our early due diligence. As we talked about, we look at the zoning, we look at utilities, we talk to local municipalities to understand the feasibility of bringing in a data center to the site. From there, we do a lot of community engagement. So things like this where we reach out to people, have them come in and talk about issues that they're hearing, things that they see, and just make sure that we are being good neighbors to the community. So Kimley-Horn does a lot of outreach to the community on this. We go to a lot of public commission meetings, board of supervisors meetings, to try and just help people understand what the actual project is and what's getting built. Permitting schedule is also a big one. One of the things that I've done on a site before is we've adjusted the schedule to account for harvesting season. So we were around a bunch of farms. We wanted to make sure we weren't disrupting that. Didn't want to have a ton of construction traffic running down the road when there's a lot of tractors and things like that. So we look at permitting schedules and make sure we're working with the community to understand how we can get the construction built and minimize the amount of impacts that we have to the community. Infrastructure upgrades and proffers. So these are our biggest ones, as we talked about already. We work with local municipalities to understand, hey, what can we do to help you guys develop your water system, develop your sewer system. Maybe you need some roads that need to be repaved to get to our facility. The other thing, proffers. So proffers are
Proffers, I think there's
some
some folks in the room who know everything they know about proffers, and some folks may have never heard the word before. But it's an old English word, and it's used a lot in Virginia law to basically serve as an offer from a developer to mitigate the impacts of a change in land use. So it's a voluntary offer of the developer to donate to the school system to mitigate the impact of the subdivision, build an additional turn lane to mitigate the impacts of the traffic impacts, or when it gets into real specific ideas, conform with the design guidelines of a master planning document to make sure that the facade of this building doesn't look like a sore thumb compared to the 4 buildings to the left and the right, and it all has a harmonious integration into the community. There's a lot of flexibility we can do as part of the planning process to get that done. And that's usually administered on some level on the zoning ordinance, the comprehensive plan, and then that boils down to the actual zoning case, where you get an approval document that says, well, when this thing's built, we're gonna give a 20%, but for data centers, parking's not usually an issue, but say like a 20% bonus on the setbacks. So instead of doing 100 feet, we're gonna do 120 feet. We're going to add this turn lane here and make sure that when people are turning into the data center, once again, traffic's not usually a big issue, but that it doesn't slow down the queue for the stoplight that is already overwhelmed. Maybe we redo the stoplight, all sorts of options we can do. And that's negotiated very early on in the life cycle of the project and runs with conditions of the land just like an easement would.
Yeah, and honestly, a lot of projects that I've worked on, we go through proffers to show that we want to be good neighbors. Let's say, and we'll talk about noise here in a second, but let's say the noise requirement at the property line is 50 dBAs. Well, maybe our proffer will say we need to meet 45 dBAs or 40 dBAs to show that we're being good partners in the community and not trying to be a nuisance to everyone. But proffers are kind of one of the main ways that we come to the community, hear what you want to say, and try and show you that we are working with you. As John said, a lot of that happens early on during the rezoning, so during the Planning Commission, Board of Supervisors, that's where we work through those and try and get those figured out. Noise studies and considerations. So I'm sure everyone, if you're here, you've seen the articles in the paper about how noisy data centers can be. 3 to 5 years ago in the past, there was a lot of noise coming from data centers. High volumes, hums that were happening. But a lot of our developers that we're working with are working on ways to minimize that and get rid of it. So, you're fine. So, for example, what we do is we bring in acoustical engineers and model the site that we're building. So during that site selection, we'll have an acoustical engineer come in and say, hey, we want to put the building on the north side of the site. What's that going to do to all of our adjacent parcels? What sound level, so dBA, what sound level is our neighbor to the north going to hear? And if he comes back and says, oh, you know what, it's going to be a little too high, it might be better if you move it to the south side of the site. So those are types of considerations that we do early on in the process to understand what we can do to minimize impact to our surrounding community. A study that I did recently is a balloon study. So a lot of data centers, when you hear, if I say I'm building a 2-story data center, it's completely different than building a 2-story house. A 2-story data center is about 60 to 65 feet tall. And we want our community to understand that if I'm building a 2-story data center, it's going to be a little bit taller than just a 2-story building. So we brought a balloon out on site, left it out there for a couple hours and said, everyone please come by. Let's say you live in a house half a mile down the road. Can you see the balloon? Are you going to be able to see that building that's there? So there's different types of studies that we can do and things that we have done to just try and ease the community and make sure that you guys understand what's going on. And then economic development and other local drivers. So as Rob said, the reason we're all here is data centers, and I'm sure you've read it, but bring in a big tax surplus to the local government. So the state of Virginia, I think they're the highest, if not the highest. Washington might be a little bit higher, but tax revenue off of data centers, Virginia's up there. If they're not 1, they're 2 in terms of the amount of money they bring in. The Northern Virginia communities and counties up there, I think Loudoun, right? Loudoun's the data center hub of the world. I believe they bring in roughly $750 million a year in data center tax revenue. And so they have great public schools, great roads, other things that you could take that tax revenue and put it into the local community. Anything else for project lifecycle?
No, and I'm sure you all have maybe some specific questions we'll get into here, but that, I think it's a pretty good overview.
Yeah, and then last slide, it does have those images again. And I want to just talk through, so these are facilities that we've worked on that have tried to implement different screening techniques, different architectural designs to blend into the community.
We were thinking about what photos to bring to this presentation. We're like, let's do something that we've actually worked on, right? That's in Virginia, that's not a rendering, it's an actual photo. And I don't know if any of y'all are like familiar with landscaping. That's not that old, right? It's easy to show 20, 30 years growth when everything's sort of like established. We want to, show some honest photos. What does this look like the first year?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And as John pointed out, I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier, berms, landscaping, those are things that we do to try and minimize the view sheds for our neighbors or if you're driving down the road as you pass these. So the two in the middle, those are actually the same site. So this wall is a little bit more, it's a earth modular retaining wall. Basically uses it to step up the site so we can get a flat grade across. But as you can see, it blends in with the area really well. And then our stormwater pond on the right. So you're standing right about this picture, standing right about here. Our stormwater pond to the right uses a lot of native grasses, native plantings to make it match what's there. So as you can tell, this is not in a Northern Virginia area. This is much more rural. And what we've done around it is tried to plant as much greenery as we can and get it to blend in. The other aspect that we want to do and talk about a little bit is the actual architectural design. So as we said, we're engineers. We don't do much of the architectural design, but we work with them. A lot of the things that we're seeing in the wave of the future is going to making sure that data centers are LEED certified or LEED Silver. So for those that don't know, LEED is a push to create more sustainable buildings in the community. So you get points for everything you can do to try and make your building more sustainable. So for example, this building down here to the left puts a lot more glass in. One, it's a nice, more visual aspect to look at compared to a big gray block building of the past. It allows more natural light in. And actually it's also more environmentally friendly. Aspects that we dive into are bird-friendly windows, making sure we're environmentally friendly through that aspect. The other thing I want to highlight in this bottom left picture is this wall right here. So that is a screening wall for water tanks. So there's actually, I believe those are 30,000 gallon tanks back behind it. I think there's 3 of them there. But that is blocking the view from water tanks. So you're not driving down the road seeing these massive tanks in the facility. The picture on the right is blocking the generators. So as we talked about earlier, backup power is required on these sites. And that wall that you see there actually blocks the view of all the generators as you're driving down the road. So just as we talked about earlier and John said, we tried to pick some pictures that showed things that you can do to make your building a little bit more architecturally friendly, blend into the local community, and create some screening so you don't see a big industrial looking building like you have seen in the past.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're not architects, right? But one thing you can tell, none of this has anything to do with servers. The design of the facade of this building was chosen between, representatives of the community, the staff, and the architect of record working together to develop something that would make it not look like an ugly big box.
Yeah.
It's not Monticello, but it's a lot nicer looking than maybe like a warehouse facility you'd see off 95 where you've got like 1,000 trucks lined up. And that's done intentionally,
Yeah.
trying to make it blend in a little better.
So the grays and the blues try and help it blend into the sky, blend into the background, so as you're driving by, it doesn't look like a big monstrosity on the side of the road. With that, that's kind of all we have for the presentation. So I want to open it up to Q&A and just kind of talk through things that y'all might have. Perfect. We answered all the questions. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, with all the advancement in technology, because like you had pointed out, maybe 5 years ago, the noise was out of control, the water, the power. Now, as technology increases, those things are starting to, not be such a big burden on the community.
Yep.
So when you build these facilities, are they scalable for the advancements of technology, or are they just,
So
it
they,
is what it is?
yeah, they are, and actually that's a big push. I think over the next 6 to 12 months, we'll see a big push of converting data centers of the past. So trying to take those big buildings and they can, with the increase in chips and computer sizes and things like that, they can fit more datas in there. And just a quick jump back. So tax revenue is based off of the computer equipment. So 2 forms of tax: the land becomes extremely valuable, and then they get taxed off of all the computer servers that they bring in. So bringing more computer servers into the same amount of space that you might only be able to fit 1,000 computers, you can now fit 1,500 or 2,000. So they're looking at ways to try and do that, which brings more tax revenue to the community, and go from there. And then they're also looking at ways to try and create the building to be a little bit more expandable in the future. Just for example, on this building here, we're kind of constrained on both sides of what we can do. So what they're going to do is looking to make it a little bit more modular. So like we're going to stop at, let's just say we're going to build 50,000 square feet. In the future, when we develop, when we figure out ways to decrease the amount of power consumption, decrease the amount of water, we can then expand 25,000, another 25,000 to increase the amount of servers that we have on that same property. What else? Yes, sir.
Did these communities have pre-existing zoning ordinances or things within their comprehensive plan that allowed for data centers, or did you kind of come in and work with them at that time?
So most of these we came in and worked with. So a lot of it is, a lot of rural communities don't have they don't have data center in their use by right or use at all. So a lot of them we try and work with, because most of the communities that we work in, data center falls under industrial. What we're trying to show and get people to understand that it operates industrial, but we're trying to make sure it's not looking industrial as we go. But most of the communities that we come into don't have data center in their zoning ordinances. So we work with them to try and get them to understand, and then help them put things in their code to talk about noise, to talk about water consumption, talk about setbacks and buffers. One of the things that we do, and it's not one of these, but another one that I've done recently, a typical setback, max on industrial is usually like 100 feet. I have sites where I've set back a building 500-600 feet to make sure that you're not going to be able to see the building from the road or from a house. Let's say the next property over is a house. We're going to run 100 foot of trees between us and that house to try and make sure to block it. So we worked with those jurisdictions to try and implement a lot more of those measures to meet and exceed any requirements that are currently in zoning regulations.
Typically, how large of a site will you need for some of these, and how far of a distance from a principal or secondary
Power source, yeah. And yeah, that brings up a good point. One of the things I didn't address is just overhead power lines. So most of our facilities that we build, we try and build a substation on site. So we'll work with Rappahannock, Novec, Dominion to try and make sure that we're building a substation. But ultimately, from the substation to the building is all underground power. Getting to the substation is overhead power. So we like to have a substation close to the site, if not on the site. But in general, the most sites that we do are, I think, minimum, like if you wanted to do one of the co-locations or edge data centers, you could do that on a 3 to 5 acre site. More of the hyperscalers, they're going, I mean, they will take 100, 200 acres and try and build more campuses so they don't have them all spread out. But really down to 3 to 5 acres and upwards we can work on.
Are any of these self-enclosed systems that basically have like maybe a glycol or some kind of an internal cooling mechanism that just has to be serviced periodically and doesn't have to have
The continuous
water?
cooling. Not ones that I've designed yet.
They're trying to work on that though,
Yeah,
right?
the liquid-
It's kind of like water cooling on a PC where it's,
Yeah.
it's a, like you said, a self-contained system.
Yeah, there's, I think the technology is not quite there yet, but we're moving towards it to where hopefully in the future they can be self-containing facilities. And we've had a couple meetings in the last couple months about like power generation on site as well. Trying to make these a little bit more sustainable in terms of they can manage everything on site.
So how many full-time employees would these provide once they were completed?
So it depends on the size. Ultimately, they operate minimal employees. I think most sites are around 25 to 30 per shift, with around 2 to 3 shifts depending on the amount of servers. So anywhere from 50 to 150, depending on the size of the building. Some of the more campuses that we're seeing, a lot of the hyperscalers going, that's probably around the 300 to 400 range, depending on how many buildings are on the campus.
And for this region, do you have a target site that is picked out that you're surveying?
No, actually, we just kind of, Rob reached out to us and said, hey, we want to get a discussion on data centers because as John, right? Yeah, as John was talking about, the Board of Supervisors a couple years ago had a discussion on data centers and they wanted to get a little bit more information. But honestly, I haven't done much work out this west of the Northern Virginia region. But I think in general, what we're seeing from a demand perspective is a push to go more rural. And I didn't really talk about this earlier, but with the increases in fiber latency, so what that means is the speed connection between data centers. We don't have to build all of the data centers in one central area. They can move out. So let's say we have 500 acres of industrial land somewhere. We can build 4, 5, 6 data centers on there and connect it back to the grid. And you're getting the same speed that you would as if you were building it right next to it in Northern Virginia. So no facility that we're looking at currently, really just wanted to kind of give you guys an understanding of what data centers are. Yes, sir.
Road improvements are pretty expensive.
Yep.
How generous are your proffers going toward those road improvements if they're necessary?
It depends on the site. I honestly, we've had a couple sites where they are in the middle of nowhere and it's been gravel roads to get there, and the end user paid for those roads to be paved because they have trucks that need to get there. But as John said, it's stuff that we want to work with y'all and work with Planning Commission, Board of Supervisors to understand, because honestly, that road is not going to be just for the end user. It's going to be for everyone else that lives off that road. So in general, a lot of the proffers dive into more of the community compared to just focused on the data center. Yes, ma'am.
Well, it's good to hear about the proffers that you're offering. But we are in the third year of a drought that has left us with restrictions that we can't even water our plants during the day. How do you proffer water? When we drive over the bridge and we see the very bedrock of the river many times this past summer.
Yep.
And we're looking to take 1 million gallons of water a day, even if you have a self-contained system that's not present, that's in the future.
Yep.
And right now, what we're looking at is taking water, depleting water from the minimum that we already have now, and then recycling that water and so taking pure water and then putting in recycled water back. I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I understand. And as we talked about, water cooling is not the only way to cool the data centers, right? So there's air cooled, what that means, and it's give and take. So air cooled requires a lot more equipment. Equipment means a lot more noise. We're not talking huge changes in decibel levels, but there will be more noise with an air cooled data center. As we talked about, I think in the next couple years, we will see some liquid cooling going through, so you won't need nearly the amount of water that is there. Some of the things that we're doing on other sites, like you said, we're doing some self-containment stuff. So let's say during the winter, you have a surplus of water, we might store some of that on site. So as we talked about, we have some tanks on site that store that water. We'll build a pond on site that stores that water, circulates it, and then puts it back into the system. So completely agreed and understand. And just to re-highlight one of the things we talked about earlier, it's not like we are drinking 1 million gallons and it's not going back into the system.
But how do you proffer water? We already have a shortage. Where are you going to take it and offer it as proffer?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we can work through with the community to try and say, hey, if we're in a drought, you guys can't be pulling water or anything like that. But that's something that we would need to work with the local government and our end user to understand that. So
That's what I was gonna say. What's really important about all this is about community and community input. This is not getting designed or considered without input, like behind your backs. Like everybody wants everybody involved to find those best solutions and to hear your input to make sure the community's best interests are at heart. You know, like you're mentioning water, it's a big concern. If that's something that's very loud in engagement meetings, that's something that has to then get worked out in the code, right? To make sure you're writing those things to be the best service to your community, right? It's not just about let's go build a building right now without your guys' input. Your input's important to make sure it best serves the community it's going into.
But it's also about not having enough of a source of water.
Right.
So there has to be another source of water. What we
Right.
presently have isn't enough for the population here, let alone the data center.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, I live in Clark County, so we're in drought. Several counties were in drought, and resiliency and resilient design is only increasing in needs for any kind of development, not just data centers, any kind of development. It's just becoming an increasing thing that needs to be considered.
I think she had a question in the back. Did you have one?
Yeah, does this increase locals' electricity or water bills?
No. Ultimately, they should be, the data center will pay for their own. It should not be increasing the demand or anything on the community. And that brings up a good point that I wanted to highlight, that in terms of people always think, well, let's say you have a blackout through the community, they're going to go to the data center first because they require the most power. And one of the things that we talked about a little bit is the data center tries to be as self-sufficient as possible. So we have backup generators on site. Those can usually last anywhere from 3 to 7 days where they can operate off their own system. So they don't have to be the first place that gets power back on. And I think Dominion and other places, I'm not going to put words in their mouth, but they want to focus on the community, not the data centers. And that's why these data centers can try and self-sufficient for almost a week before they actually need to be back tied into the system. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you've been talking about describing a rural agricultural kind of area. And there's a difference, I think, between rural area and historical,
Yeah.
ecological kind of area.
Yep.
That this is. Has your company been involved with designing anything around that kind of a field?
Yeah.
As opposed to?
Yeah, I mean, we're in the state of Virginia, ton of battles were fought here, ton of historical significance to the entire state of Virginia. And that's actually one of the things, I probably need to put it on the slide. During due diligence, we get with historians and local reviewers to try and understand, was this site maybe an old plantation or things like that. And we go through Virginia DEQ, who handles historical resources, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers, who handles historical resources. So when we have to go get permits, we have to get buy-off from DEQ and the Corps on those sites. So I know solar's the same way. But yeah, ultimately we've done a good amount of sites, and we try and be reviewing early and often those types of features to ensure that our site's not going to impact any historical significance.
And that's where the community has the power, if I may. I think sort of the question that hasn't been asked is, well, that's all well and good that, you know, your clients want to be good neighbors and that sort of thing, but you're kind of asking us to take their word for it, right? But all these things are enforceable through code. So if you have a zoning ordinance that defines what a data center is, it can define where they're allowed, where they're not allowed, and where they're allowed by what might be called a special use permit or special exception process that has to rely on the public input to get approved and is subject to a certain number of criteria, including but not limited to phase 1, phase 2 cultural resource studies that have to be performed by a professional and reviewed by the state historic preservation officer. It can include due diligence above and beyond a phase 1 environmental study, environmental compliance like stormwater management, or something as simple as you need to put in water cleaner than you do it from the water supply back into the river, which is what I know some jurisdictions in Loudoun have done, where it's literally coming out of the on-site waste treatment plant cleaner than the water than the river is. You can require that in the code basically by integrating that into the zoning ordinance and the facilities manual, and then it doesn't matter who's developing, it doesn't matter who the owner is or who the ultimate owner is, they're bound by those requirements.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I want to thank the three of you for being here this afternoon. I've been dabbling on this thing kind of on the periphery for a long time. And I've learned more about data centers in the last hour than I have basically from what I've done for the last 3 or 4 years.
Thank you.
How available, where do you people three live? How available are you to come in and make a presentation to a larger audience than here in Warren County?
Good.
I give Rob MacDougall exceedingly high marks for scheduling this. This
Yeah.
was advertised to community leaders, based on what Rob shared with me, to come in and get some background data on it. And it just got out recently, within the last 48 hours, I think, you know, to the community at large. I mean, we could fill up a high school gym, we could fill up a theater here locally, and get 3,000 or 4,000 community people to come in and hear what we've heard this afternoon.
Oh, yeah.
My question is, how available are you people to come back and do something for a larger audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can work with Rob and team to do this again. I mean, 20 minutes, 30 minutes away. I'm 45 minutes to an hour, depending on traffic. So
Same here.
it's not a bad drive, and it's a beautiful drive on 66. I would love to come out again.
And we've definitely done programs
Yeah.
with high schools too, where we
Yeah.
go in and talk with kids about engineering and what we do is like career development type stuff to give them ideas of what they can do with a career. Because I know I grew up very rural and I didn't know what all my options were. So I love that we do that, and it's very valuable to understand not only learning more about specific project types, but certain career paths as well.
Yeah, if you know anybody who's graduating an engineering degree in the next year, you tell us at the end of the presentation.
Yes, sir.
Can you touch on, water's been a big topic, can you touch on the emerging purple pipe world?
Yeah, the reclaimed water. Reclaimed water is a big next step, I would say. So reclaimed water is water after it leaves the water treatment plant, as we've already talked about. So one of the things that we are trying to implement more is, and as John said, reclaimed water a lot of times is cleaner than the water you're actually getting out of the stream. But we are circulating that through certain sites for fire flow. Right, you gotta have all your fire flow, as well as.
What that means is we'll have the water that's used to cool the computers, right? But these buildings can, catch on fire just like anything else. They're subject to the same national and local fire codes that large warehouses are. So we have a system of pipes that provides what we call a fire flow water supply. Basically means typically something like 2,000 gallons per minute available. It's never used, right? Because these things almost never catch on fire. But we have to make sure that supply is there just in case you need to open up the hydrant and put the fire out. So for these larger buildings, we need to put those pipes in the ground.
And the other thing with reclaimed water is it's on the back end of the water treatment plant. It's basically creating a big circular loop of water. So instead of discharging it back into the stream, pulling it back out, we are circulating that water on site many times through, compared to just pulling water out of the system, dumping it back into the sewer.
And isn't it true that the discharge water now coming out of the plant is simply discharge, done, it's over? There's no real monetization of that. So the purple pipe would pick up there, be metered back to this facility and create, you pay for that water, which is a
Over and
brand new
over.
revenue source. And then it comes back in the loop and continues in the loop. So
Yep.
it's not net zero, I don't wanna say that,
Yeah.
but it's,
You're gonna lose water, right? So water cooling, the way water cooling works, it's off evaporation. So you're running it through this hot system, water's gonna evaporate, so you're not getting a full net zero, but you're gonna lose some. But as he was talking about, overall, it is another way to bring income in. I know Fairfax County, you have sewer fees that are discharged in, and they do the exact same thing. They circulate it through and treat it as reclaimed water throughout the system.
You're good.
I think we can go here. Yes, sir.
Yeah, have y'all ever built in a karst area, and I imagine you also do geotechnical studies prior to construction, and have you ever used water from quarries for cooling, as a cooling water source?
Yeah, so on all these, so they're large buildings. They require some high structural foundations to make sure they're going to be done. So during, and I didn't highlight it there, but really during our early phase, we do two types of due diligences. We do a high-level desktop that's talking to the community, reviewing all the resources we can, and then we do a phase B due diligence that is geotech report, all of the cultural heritage reports that we do. So geotech is a big aspect of this, making sure that we can design the building on the soils that are there. In terms of the quarry, I haven't designed one that's used quarry water before. I know I've designed one that's worked on some well water before. So we've done some couple hundred feet deep wells to some aquifers that we've tapped into, stuff that none of the local community is using. So we've done that on a couple sites. And honestly, a lot of these facilities and a lot of the end users that we work with, they'll do temporary measures. So like we'll tap into the aquifers until a pipeline gets built 5 years down the road, and then we can circulate back into the system once it's up and running.
Yeah, I've done some projects on mines, and mines when they go through the reclamation process when they're converted from a quarry back to normal land. There's very strict rules about how you do that. Usually what you have to do is basically restore it to what it was before you were digging. And so a lot of that water that would normally be stored in a quarry might have stuff in it that it might be okay to slowly recharge your groundwater, but you don't necessarily want to put it into the potable system or anything like that. It would require a lot of testing. So usually that dewatering is actually subject to like filtering and monitoring. So it's kind of the opposite.
Yes, sir.
Two things having to do, we talked about the power and the substations, and you have your backup power generators on site, and a whole another set of noise standards, I'm sure. How much power are you actually looking at for it to be attractive to build a data center there? And also, the data throughput, it's all going to be on fiber, with links and so on. How much fiber, and have any idea of what that availability is in this area now?
Last question first. I don't know what the availability is in this area because, as I said, I haven't really looked at anything around this area. In terms of the power consumption, the small edge data center, you're looking at maybe 3 to 5 megawatts of power. The larger data centers, single building, anywhere from 50 to 100 megawatts. And just for your awareness, so let's say Rappahannock's building a substation out there outside. Their substation is going to be about 300 megawatts. So you can operate 3 to 4 buildings off of that. But one of the things that we work with Rappahannock a good bit, one of the things that we try and do is make sure that substation isn't solely focused on the data center, right? We want to tie in that, if we're building a substation, we want to tie in the community to it as well. So one, less blackouts if you're not connected to the substations. And then two, we can create that grid system that they're looking for of tying in different substations to different facilities. So they have the redundancy backup power. So maybe you have power lines coming from the east and the west. Let's say the east goes down, you have the west to back up that substation on site.
And the fiber?
Fiber, so typical fiber, if you just see going down the road, they're directionally drilling fiber almost across the entire state of Virginia. But I don't know, like, I think in general, the fiber that you see on the side of the road is usually like a big cluster of fiber that has multiple strands that they can tie into. We're not running a lot of, so on site we run duct banks of fiber to connect everything, but once it gets off site, you're running usually a 10 to 12 inch line of fiber that ties it back into the full system.
It's surprisingly efficient.
Yeah, so, and, yes ma'am.
One thing that hasn't been addressed, but I've read about it in quite a few articles from Loudon and Fairfax. Well, first of all, we've got the light pollution at night.
Yeah.
So would you address that, please? And then there are also claims that residences within the area as a result of tower surges, have had their appliances burn out. So if you could just address both.
Yeah, so light pollution, so these are 24/7 facilities, so they are going to have lights on site for people to operate at night. One of the big things, and I actually just finished a project that had proffers on light pollution, is we have to meet, so light is measured in foot candles. We have to meet 0 foot candles at our property lines. So a lot of times most of our light is focused inwards and making sure we have light on the facility but not draining off of or going off of our facility. And then also we are starting to implement lights that only focus down, right? So we don't want the big bulb lights that you see at like a local car dealership that 24/7 is bright as day. So a lot of the lights that we're implementing are focused downwards, and so that pollution is not going up and out of our facility.
And that's pretty easy to codify. They're called fully shielded and downward lights. You can put that into the ordinance fairly simply. And then the same thing, we engineers, we know how to do this. We actually calculate what the foot candles will be measured at every point in the site. And we can show a map showing that basically it's no brighter than it would be if the building weren't there at the property line. You can require that.
In terms of the appliances, honestly, I haven't dealt with that too much. Honestly, it's based on the substation that it's tied into, right? But the way these data centers are set up, they have switches that should not be sending power back into the substation. So I don't know what's going on with the appliances, but there are fail safes to make sure that the data center is not sending massive amounts of power back into the grid. What else? Yes, sir.
John, this is for you, sir. You had mentioned the special use versus by right. A lot of communities, are behind the 8 ball, as you said, especially more rural, such as we are out here. Special use obviously gives us the opportunity to have public input and address issues that may be common to a site.
Right.
Of all of the data centers that you've designed, what's the ratio of special use to by right use that you've run across in your work?
Well, I'm curious, you said here, I would say nowadays it's becoming the majority.
Yeah. So
10 years ago, it was the minority.
yeah.
But as counties and townships have caught on, they're like, you know what, we want to have a hand to steer this. We trust these folks, but we want to keep a hand on the steering wheel. And we want to make sure we have the power through the code to enforce the proffers or development review, and community input. Like, all is well and good, but we really want you to preserve this one farmhouse because it's important to the community. These kind of inputs, right, they matter.
Yeah.
I feel like it's 80% plus these days.
Yeah, I would say, like we talked about 5-10 years ago, everything was by right. But in the last 2 years, probably, I've gone to 10 to 12 special exceptions projects that we've had. I mean, most of them, honestly, I don't want to say the end users want them, but I feel like they find benefits to going and talking to the community. As we talked about earlier, if we are by right, most of the times my developer will say, hey, let's just have a town hall and bring people in to understand the project. So I would say a lot of local municipalities are going to it for the fact that John highlighted that they want to make sure that they're steering this and that not every single site in a community can be developed into a data center. So
Right.
You touched on this a little bit regarding the tax revenue. Do you have kind of a rule of thumb or a comparison you can tell us about these facilities versus a distribution or industrial facility?
I do not. Rob and I talked about this yesterday. I have looked through it. Honestly, it's a user-specific tax revenue. So there's tons of tax codes. So the hyperscalers get tax breaks when they develop. I think it's northwards of 100,000, but then they turn around and pay that back when they put their computers into the system.
Because there's the upfront and then the recurring taxes.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
So I will do a little bit more research, see if I can find something. I don't. There's not a hey, I'm putting 100 servers in. I'm going to pay $1 million a year for tax revenue. So I have not seen anything, but I'll see if I can find anything else.
So from your initial investment of the end user, the equipment in it is going to depreciate, according to whatever the municipality's schedule is. But at some point, they're going to replace that equipment with new equipment, right? And so then you start right back up here at the top. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So I think I don't know the schedules. This is well beyond my outside expertise, but I think it starts at like first year's 75, 50, 25, 15, 10, something like that. But yeah, so the tax revenue replenishes every 5-7 years, depending on how often they're replacing the servers.
But that's the win-win you were talking about, where if it's upgraded with more efficient equipment later on, the end user gets more computing power, the community gets more
Yep.
tax revenue, it's a win-win.
Yep, exactly.
Any idea what the replacement timeline is for the end users in general? Just
Honestly, it depends on the upgrades in the servers. It might be, I think currently it's in that 4 to 5 year time frame, but it might be, I mean, with the upgrades in servers, it might be every 2 years to try and keep up with demand. So we'll see. Yes, sir.
Good portion of the south end of the county, it has access to the Shenandoah National Park, George Washington National Forest.
Yep.
So there is a view shed here in the county.
Yeah.
It's a long ways north, okay, and our industrial corridors north.
Yep.
Have you designed any of these with like rooftop solar?
So-
And what have you done to mitigate some of that
So-
view shed impact?
Yeah, we can look at this one right here. So solar on the roof it's not worth its bang for buck. So there's a lot of equipment on the roof, and
We've tried.
yeah, I was gonna say John does a solar practice as well, so he's done a lot of this stuff. But it just, you're not getting the capacity that would be there to put the solar panels on. For view sheds, we do a lot of screening on the roofs as well, which we didn't talk about. So the actual roof ridge of this building probably sits about the top of that louver right there. And then they do parapet walls, screenings on the walls to block all that equipment.
So it's a false wall that goes up high to hide the stuff on the roof, basically.
The other thing that we do, and I just did one last week, is we do view shed corridors. So let's say you're standing a mile up, let's say the data center's up on a hill, you're standing down and you want to look up to the mountains. We're going to design that building. So like, let's say our site is up on the hill, the mountains are up here, you're down here. We're going to push our building back to the back of the site to try and make sure that view shed is blocked off. And if you do see anything, it's going to be a nice architectural wall over there, and then go from there. So as we talked about the studies that we do a lot of view shed line of sight studies. We've had winter versus summer studies, right? So trees get thin, you might be able to see through the trees. So we've done a whole gambit of those types of things to make sure people understand what's going on.
And the view shed stuff too, like they might go on site, I might go on site, take a picture of where it might be, and I can render what it will look like there, so it's not a mystery as to what's happening.
Like actually sitting on the street corner looking
Yes.
north, right?
Yep. And we do that for more than just data centers, right? There might be some kind of development happening. The community wants to know what it's gonna look like when it's done. It's really hard to see a engineering drawing and figure out dimensionally in their community what it's gonna look like. So during our public engagement phase and all those types of meetings, we like to be able to show you what you're gonna get, and you provide input on that.
Last couple of questions.
So how about the reverse, of a view shed, right? So if you're up on Skyline Drive looking down on it, you want to disguise that building with, I've seen online pictures of greenery and stuff like that could be on the roof. Is it a green roof? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, you could do green roofs and things like that. I think I have not designed one with a green roof, but I know there are
We've
ways
looked
to
at
blend
it.
in.
So green roofs, I've worked on a few projects with them. They depend a lot on the local ecology, right? You need something that can withstand drought and that sort of thing, because you don't want to have irrigation on the roof. So what we typically end up doing around here will be, if we would do what's called an intensive green roof, be about 4 to 8 inches of combination of grass and sedum. So pretty drought resistant stuff, but still using native materials. We have had some success in like the warehouse type development because there's more rooftop units in a data center world. We've done it, it gets crowded up there fast. So probably if you're looking at doing something where you're mitigating the visual impact from up high, you're probably gonna do that either with combination of the parapet walls, like Jamie was describing, or honestly just colors, right? Using like the gravel you have on the roof and that sort of thing that blends, more like a camouflage, right, than trying to actually plant stuff.
Yes, ma'am.
Connie, did you?
My question was answered.
Oh, perfect. Well, appreciate everybody.
Yeah, just gonna wrap up there. We have the room for another 15 minutes or so. I did want to
We'll
give
be here.
folks a chance to mingle for a few minutes and come up if you have something you want to ask our guests. Thanks so much to this wonderful and informative presentation. And also, it sounds like your willingness to come out again.
Absolutely, yeah.
Colonel Lumber can fill a room with 3,000 people. Here
we go.
And also thanks to our guests. Like I said at the beginning, at the introduction, making the effort to come out and just learn in a sort of a soft format a little bit more about this sector and all the detail that goes into it. So, round of applause for our presenters.